Hi, and welcome to today's episode of PhD Career Stories. And please welcome with me today's guest, Ashley Ruba. Ashley is a psychologist and she holds a PhD in developmental psychology from the University of Washington. And about 1.5 years ago, Ashley transitioned from academia to industry, starting with UX research and then moving forward to human factors engineering. And today she is leading human factors research at Arthrex, where they are developing digital technologies for orthopedic surgery. But that is not all, because Ashley is also mentoring more than 60,000 academics on LinkedIn to inspire them to launch a successful non academic career. And she also recently started a coaching business. So it's really exciting to have you on. Thanks a lot for being on our channel and sharing your story and your journey with us, Ashley. But very warm welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for that very warm welcome.
Yeah. So maybe can you tell us shortly what is human factors engineering? This is to me it was a totally new word.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have heard of UX research, but not human factors engineering. And human factors engineering is, I view it as a subset of UX research. It actually predates UX research. So, human factors is a combination of psychology and ergonomics, and it became more of a discipline in World War II when airplane cockpits became very complicated and you still had highly skilled pilots who were crashing planes. So instead, the people who were designing the planes decided to make them more human friendly in order to reduce human error. So when you're designing with human factors in mind, you're designing with humans in mind. So what are our motoric capabilities? What are our cognitive limitations? And what are our perceptual biases and limitations? And then you're designing systems that are safe and effective for use. So you see human factors engineers mostly in medical devices, automotive industry, and the aerospace industry. But also you're starting to see them more with like wearables as well.
Okay. That's really exciting. And I think your background then as a psychologist comes in very, very handy or is indispensable, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I am the only PhD and the only psychologist by training on my team. Everyone else has a background in industrial engineering or industrial design or in human factors specifically. But I do think that my background in psychology does give me a different perspective than everyone else on my team has.
Mm. Yeah, I can imagine that. But maybe we can touch upon that a little bit later, which skills you might need and what your daily job is about.
Mhm.
But first, maybe how did you actually get from your PhD and then you did also a postdoc to industry, and what made you actually land this job?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I started my PhD in developmental psychology with the goal of, I think, many PhD students of wanting to become a faculty member. I really loved research, and I went through most of my PhD program very focused on that goal. I ended up in my fourth year sitting on a faculty search committee, so I saw the process from the other side, and I saw how academic hiring worked, and I watched as we had a stack of 120 candidates and we were cutting people and we were cutting people with CVs that were much better than mine. And I just thought, I'm not good enough to be here. And yeah, so I looked into UX research at that point, but then ultimately I got a pretty prestigious postdoctoral fellowship and ended up taking that. And I started that at the end of 2019, 6 months before COVID shut down everything. So I watched the academic job market collapse in 2020. Universities stopped hiring. It picked up a little bit again in 2021, but basically all of a sudden I was a third year postdoc and I had to make a choice whether I wanted to continue being a postdoc and continue trying for an academic job or whether I wanted to do something different. And so I about it was about 2 years ago now when I decided that I was going to change careers, and I knew I wanted a research career. I applied to a bunch of different stuff and I ended up taking the first job offer I got, which was in UX research. And I really enjoyed it. And after I was at a small consulting firm for about 3 months, I ended up moving to Meta. And then I was at Meta working in reality labs for a year, working in augmented reality and virtual reality. During that time, there were the multiple like major waves of layoffs at Meta. And I started realizing that I wanted to work at probably a smaller company that was a little more stable. And at that point, and during this process, I had been posting on first on Twitter and then on LinkedIn, just talking about my journey and giving career advice. And I actually connected with my manager, my current manager, on LinkedIn. He sent me a connection request. And then several months after that, he responded to one of my posts when I was talking about maybe wanting to change careers. And he mentioned that he was hiring at his company. And then I slid into his DMs, and now I'm working at a medical device company. And yeah, entirely through posting and networking on LinkedIn. So I'm a big LinkedIn fan.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. This is actually also how I stumbled about you. I mean,
Yeah.
I was following your content and I got really inspired. But I mean, maybe there were two things that I would like to ask you about. So when you actually decided to leave academia and to leave your dream of following
Mhm.
this envisioned path, um, what I mean, did it take you a lot of courage? How did you get actually the strength to say, okay, now I switch gears, I go for something else?
Yeah, when I took this postdoctoral fellowship, it was a 3-year fellowship, and I told myself that I was going to give myself 3 years to try to find a faculty job, and if that didn't happen, then I would do something else because I didn't want to be one of these. I had talked to people who had been postdocs for 5 or 6 years, and so I knew going into it, I did not want to do that. I obviously didn't expect a global pandemic to happen in the middle of my postdoc. Um, so then when I was in my third year and I didn't have academic jobs, and I was thinking back to what I had told myself at the beginning, which was I'm not going to do more than 3 years of a postdoc. And at that point I was really I I had felt really over it. I was tired of being treated like a trainee. I really wanted to have more responsibility and run my lab. That's like all I had wanted to do for years. And it was just I felt really frustrated. I was also living in a state that, like in the middle of the country where I didn't know anybody, and I just there were just a lot of things. I wasn't happy anymore. So for me, it just seemed like the only choice at that point. And I think the thing that scared me was just telling people that I was leaving because I knew that people were going to be really disappointed. And even when I talked to people who like started grad school with me, a few of them had told me, of everyone in our cohort, we thought you were going to be the one who made it. Like you seemed very determined and like very successful. And I was like, yeah, I thought so too. I think everyone thought so. And yeah, and I think that's why when I posted a, a little less than 2 years ago on Twitter that I was leaving academia, that tweet went viral. And I think it was because so many people were just very shocked that I would have walked away from all of this. But I just wasn't happy. So it didn't really seem that brave to me. It was just like, I don't really have another choice is kind of how it felt in my mind.
Okay. Yeah. But still, it's courageous then to,
Yeah.
go different paths and explore the unknown, which is mostly, I mean, industry is mostly for academics or when you are
Hmm.
academically trained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure.
Yeah. And then, so you said it a little bit. You were already active on Twitter then during your academic.
I was I was on Twitter. I wouldn't say I was particularly active. I made two memes in my post during my postdoc that were pretty popular. That was, and I think people followed me because I had 15 fifth author papers at the end of the day. I'd won like multiple dissertation awards. Like people were starting to become aware of who I was, but I I don't think I had more than 1,000 followers like when I said that I was leaving academia. And then now I have over 30,000 on Twitter and about like 30 over 35,000 on LinkedIn. But posting on LinkedIn, I only started doing that a year ago. So much
Okay.
more recent. Yeah.
Wow. But I mean, you know, you hear a lot about personal branding and so on, but what do you say, like to someone like me, for example, who is then a little bit afraid of doing that, of stepping out and of maybe being afraid not having interesting things to say, or having maybe uh, yeah, opposition maybe of you know, marketing oneself, you know, that,
Yeah.
I mean.
It's definitely it's not just you. So I've heard estimates that only like 1 to 3% of LinkedIn users actually post anything, and I think that's true across like most social media platforms. Most people don't actually create any kind of content whatsoever. And what I really like about LinkedIn and why it's my favorite social media platform is that everyone there is very nice. And I when I was posting on Twitter, it the the pushback I got was sometimes very critical of me and sometimes still is very critical of me. And I've just never experienced that on LinkedIn. So I feel very unafraid of posting things on LinkedIn. Every time I post something on Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it now, I do feel that fear because people could be quite combative. But so if that's any consolation, I've really experienced like very little pushback, or even when people do disagree with me, it's always in a very respectful way. But yeah, I talk to a lot of people who think they don't really have anything to say or that no one is going to care. But I think like the worst, like with content creation in general, you just have to do it like over and over again. If you like want to build an audience, if that is ultimately your goal, it's just about showing up every single day, and then you learn what kinds of things are useful for people and what people want to see, because creating content is it's all about the like what other people want ultimately. So like what you think is interesting isn't necessarily what other people think is interesting. And that's also the point of UX research and why I like content creation, because it's all just I put a post out in the world and then I'm trying to figure out, okay, like why did that post do particularly well, but then this other post like did it really resonate with people? And then you're just gathering more information and constantly tweaking things. But I think it's just about showing up every single day. And I I receive so many messages from people thanking me for doing what I do that I can't imagine not doing it. Because when I was transitioning out of academia, I don't there was not really anyone like me in this space who I felt like I could look up to or was giving advice or was a role model. It just felt really isolating. So I'm trying to be the person I wish that I had 2 years ago.
Oh, that's really lovely. Oh, and I mean, your success proves that, yeah, you really are valuable and are a role model for a lot of people, and yeah, inspiring a lot of people also. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. Yeah, but uh, maybe now coming to all those new fields that you have been diving into. I mean, human factors research and also social media. Um, what are the skills that you already had in your PhD that you can actually use now? And on the contrary, maybe what did you need to unlearn, that, you know, it was good to shrug off and to yeah, replace with something more useful?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think ultimately the skills that I use are going to be different than the skills that other people use who are going into different roles. So I transitioned into a research focused career. but I also work with people and talk with people who want to go into writing or instructional design um, or like more teaching related careers. And so the skills that they're using are different than what I use. But as a UX researcher, human factors engineer, the skills that translated the most for me were all of my research skills. So my ability to come up with a research question, come up with a study design, really logically think through the scientific process, come up with variables, figure out how we're going to analyze the data, writing it up, reporting it back, and that the whole understanding of the research process and then also being able to manage multiple studies at one time, like that is ultimately what I do day to day in my job. It's just in a very different area. I studied babies for 10 years and now I'm working in tech and medical devices, so subject matter is different, but at the end of the day, the research process is still the same. The one thing that I find that people who want to move into UX research or any kind of like product related field is product experience. And when we're in academia and we're designing studies, we're not building products that we're ultimately going to sell. And so there's a whole product development life cycle, and the questions that you're asking and the methods that you use differ depending on what stage of the product development life cycle you're at. And the impact of your work ends up being different, because in academia we think of impact and we think about like impact factor and publications and citations, and like that's how we measure whether our work was impactful. But outside of academia, it's much more about how much revenue did we generate, or did I develop a tool that improved a process by some percentage. And so you're quantifying impact in a very different way. It feels more, maybe not useful, but like for me it feels more useful. I think the other thing that can be hard is just like working at a faster pace and having to make decisions with, maybe you don't have all of the information, maybe you don't have time to sit down and do years worth of intensive data collection on a particular topic before you're making a decision, because that's just a really long time in the business world. So just about moving quicker ultimately, without sacrificing, you know, the quality of your work ultimately.
Okay, so those were things that you learned now in the industry
Yeah, yeah.
environment.
So I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about product development and slightly different research methods than what I was using before when I was in academia, and different ways of reporting data as well. Because in academia, we write these really dense scientific papers, and at least in my previous two roles, our reports were just PowerPoint presentations, and that was it. Our goal was just to communicate our findings. It wasn't to get them published. It didn't matter if they were statistically significant or not. In my current role, we do write longer documents for reports, but that's because I'm in medical devices and we end up submitting a lot of things to different regulatory boards. But we are also trying to move towards, not only like do we have this document that we can submit, but we're also making a PowerPoint where we can very quickly tell other people, tell product managers, tell the CEOs, other stakeholders what we found and where we should go next.
Okay, so it's also actually a lot of communication skills and
Oh, oh yeah,
different
yeah.
audiences. Oh,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in my role, I'm working with designers and prototypers, like who are actually building whatever software, hardware we're using. But then I'm also working with project managers who are making sure all of the pieces are going well, and product managers who are making all of the decisions about the big strategic decisions about a particular product. And yeah, just having to interface with all of these people in order to figure out, okay, what research questions, of all of these research questions we can test, like what's important to test and like how are we going to do it, and basically advocating for the user and for research and in the whole product development process.
okay, wow, that sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
But may maybe touch upon that once more? Is there anything, because now I've heard a lot about adaptability, that this is really important, and one factor there is also to unlearn things and
Mhm.
to forget about something. Could you think about something that you actually needed to unlearn during this process?
Yeah, I think what I ended up unlearning, maybe I didn't need to, but I had put in academia so much of my like self-worth in my research because you're very siloed in academia, and I was creating this research project. I had a lot of program, I had a lot of ownership over it, and it felt like if my results aren't significant, if my study fails, then I am a failure. If my publications get rejected, then I am a failure. Like I'm not a good scientist. And it really like all of the blame and the burden like fell on me with every single rejection. And it was, I had to, and what ended up happening is like I separated myself from my work, which just ultimately ended up happening because like I said, I'm working with a team of, sometimes 20 different people on a project. And so I'm contributing a piece to it. And I do have a lot of ownership over the research part of it, but ultimately the success or failure of this project isn't just solely on my shoulders. Like we're all in this together. And I think, yeah, having to I think I'm ultimately like pretty good at collaborating with other people is what I learned. I think some academics I've heard from a lot of professors are like, I'm not going to be happy if I have to work with a boss, but like it's actually nice to like work together towards a common goal. But yeah, I think I had to really start like separating myself from my work and like separating my identity from my career, which was hard at times because I had been in this field for over a decade. I'm like, what am I if I'm not like an expert on like infant emotion perception? Like, what do I like? What am I good for anymore?
Yeah, but how did you succeed in doing that? Can you
Yeah, I think
tip for
part
any
of it was just,
strategy?
yeah, part of it was just time. Just like
Mm.
time in a new role. And I think also, at the end of the day, I wasn't thinking about work anymore because I feel like in academia you just have this never ending to-do list. Like you could work 80 hours a week and you would still not get everything done because it never ends. The bar for like the number of publications you need to be considered successful is just like ever increasing, and it just never felt like enough. But yeah, I think just having more free time, and then it's like, okay, well, what do I want to do? And so I started like reading books again, which is something that I had done before I wasn't in my PhD program. And then I just read so many scientific articles during my PhD and my postdoc that the last thing I wanted to do was read more books at the end of the day. So it was just about like reclaiming hobbies that I had tossed aside. So I like going out dancing. I like reading books. I like cooking, all these things that I didn't really do so much when I was in academia. And that's helped me figure out more of like what is my identity outside of academia and what do I like doing? Is just trying new things.
Yeah, that sounds really nice and also very, very healthy, actually.
Yeah.
For yeah, for mental health. I mean, this is I know this is often overlooked during an
Oh, for sure.
academic journey.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah. So yeah, that's really nice. Uh, so maybe what when you now create content on LinkedIn, what is inspiring you? You said before a little bit that you do analytics and you kind of see what is resonating, but you're kind of yeah, also leading a topic. You have topic leadership. So how do you get inspired?
In terms of figuring out what to write every day, or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and what
Uh,
where the the topic is that is interesting.
yeah. Um, so that's a good question. So I think I didn't have a strategy for a really long time. And then I started thinking about it more. And so my strategy is basically, and I've developed a coaching program now, so I really had to think about this. But after talking with PhDs for almost 2 years and going through the job search process myself multiple times, I started figuring out like what where people were struggling. And it was always the same thing when I talk to people. And even now when I do one-on-one coaching, I feel like the meetings, it's always the same thing. It's like, well, what can I do with my PhD? Like, how do I write a resume? How do I use LinkedIn? Like, I don't know how to build a network. And so it's always the same questions and the same places that people are struggling. So now that I actually have a really good understanding of where like misconceptions that PhDs have and where PhDs are struggling, I create content to address like these issues and these questions that people are asking me all of the time. And so yeah, and that's essentially like ultimately like user research at the end of the day. You're just trying to figure out like where are people's pain points and like how do I make something that solves a problem that people have. and and yeah, so that's ultimately it. But yeah, I find that it's, yeah, usually like career exploration is like really hard for people. Writing a resume is something that PhDs struggle with, and then networking is ultimately the biggest struggle. And using LinkedIn. Those are the four things that always come up like over and over again.
Mm. So, and I mean, did it happen to you already that you thought, okay, I've said it all? I mean, or how
Yeah,
do
I
you
mean,
find?
yeah, and I guess that's the thing with like content creation is you ultimately do say the same thing over and over again. And I haven't been like intentionally doing, I've started more intentionally like really paying attention to like what's resonating with people, because I feel like when I started doing this, like this all of this, like the following that I have was very accidental. I did not like set out to gain a social media following whatsoever. It just kind of like happened to me, and I actually took a really long social media break in March of this year. I got like really, I was really struggling with my mental health. I got like really burnt out, and I was like, I think maybe this is it. I think maybe I'm just done. I don't want to do this anymore. And then I ended up coming back at the end of August of this year. And when I came back, I'm like, okay, I'm going to really like try this now and actually try to like monetize this weird influence I have in some way, because that felt like the only way that it felt like worth it to me to just keep pouring so much time into like creating content and talking to people. It was just a lot to be doing for free. And so now it's really been over the past few months that I've really started thinking more strategically about this, because before I was just like throwing out stuff into the world and I wasn't really like thinking about it that deeply.
No, no, and you create value. I mean, this is so
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's really cool and also fair. And by having a coaching program that people can actually subscribe to is even, yeah, it's a win-win, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I was hesitant about like charging anyone for anything for a really long time, because I think in academia where taught that like free labor is pretty normal, and I also am very aware that PhD students, postdocs, lecturers, professors like don't have a lot of disposable income. So ultimately, my goal is, I'm not trying to like swindle anybody or like exploit anybody, but yeah, I think like I'm still in the process of figuring out, like what is like a fair price to charge for like the amount of work that I've put into like helping people, but also trying to help as many people as possible. And it's like an interesting balance. I've learned a lot about sales and marketing, which is not something I ever thought I would be interested in. But
Yeah.
it's taught me a lot. You mentioned personal branding. It's taught me a lot about like personal branding too, as well, in the process.
No, no, that's exciting, and who knows where it will end up in the end. So
I
that's
Yeah, and I think that's also the thing. Like I follow a lot of just like LinkedIn content creators on LinkedIn, and people who have hundreds of thousands of followers, and everyone's kind of saying the same thing. It's like, it's not, social media is mostly just about showing up every single day and being like, I'm going to do this for years. Like, this isn't just, I think people like give up pretty easily if they're like, well, I didn't hit 100,000 followers in, 6 months, so this isn't worth it. But the people who have the biggest accounts are just people who have been doing this every single day for years, and they know that this is like a long-term thing. And that's kind of what I'm how I feel. I'm like, I'm in this for the long haul. I don't know where this is going to go, but wherever it goes, I'm just gonna like show up every single day and try to help people. And yeah, and hopefully hopefully I help people. And I know that I have
Amazing.
helped people, like people have told
Yeah.
me. So
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, so many people following you. Also, I mean, you don't
yeah,
follow out for no reason. So that's yeah. But
yeah.
now, when you say you're full in doing LinkedIn and your coaching program, and but you're also full in
Yeah.
your daily job. So how do you manage your time?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a good question. So, I mean, I had thought about this a lot because I really like my job, and I'm actually working with I'm actually in a coaching program myself as someone who is being coached with other
Mhm.
people who are creators on LinkedIn. I think a lot of people they really like the dream of just like being a content creator full time, and I feel weird being like, but I really like my full time job. So I see this definitely more as like a side thing that I do. But yeah, I think how I manage it is I just work really quickly. And I think as someone who, I was recently like diagnosed with ADHD. And I think one of the systems that I had like put in place for most of my life to manage this was just like keeping myself really busy so I didn't have time to be distracted by other things. And so I actually work the best when I have a lot of work to do. Um, and so
Okay.
that was also part of starting this was I felt like I didn't have enough work to do to keep my brain stimulated. So now I feel like I'm working like a little more than I want to. But it's also because like when I'm doing this coaching program right now, every week I'm giving a webinar on a different topic. Like I've set this up a very step by step way from, like, okay, what do I do with my PhD to, okay, I have an interview. Like how do I get through my interview? And so every week I'm preparing the lecture for the week, and course prep just takes a really long time. So I think once like I am fully done with all of this course prep, then I'll have a lot of time back. But yeah, I think it's just like in the early stages of any kind of business, you just end up having to invest a lot of time. But then like down the line, I know that it's not always going to be like this.
Yeah, no, because yeah, I mean, it might not be sustainable for you to put
Yeah.
so much work and yeah, so many balls in the air, juggling balls, so to
Yeah,
say.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
no, for sure. And definitely like my full-time job, like that comes first. But yeah, I also have the benefit of like my company is on the other side of the country. So like my working hours are like they're like 7 a.m. to like 6 or 7 a.m. to like 2 p.m. And so then basically like after 2 p.m. it's just I have time to do this. And so yeah, I end up like I said, like working more than right now than I maybe would prefer, but it's ultimately like doing things that I really enjoy. So in some
yeah,
ways it like doesn't necessarily feel
yeah.
like work.
No, that's really lovely, and one can really feel that. I mean, that it's not, yeah, that it's also passion and not only like work. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really like writing. So, I mean, having LinkedIn being mostly like a writing platform, and then also like Twitter is mostly writing. It never, I really enjoy that process. And so that, I don't know, it doesn't feel like work. It's just like it's a very creative process for me. And so that also helps.
yeah. No, that's really amazing. It's how you manage all that and
Yeah.
manage also to be creative, like a creative source.
Yeah.
That's really inspiring. I actually read recent post of you, I think it was 2 days ago, and you said that you stumbled upon a lot of, I mean, you pivoted in your
Hmm.
career
Yeah.
path, and you just would like to stay curious about what to do next. I hope
Hmm.
I
Oh, that's right.
paraphrase it right. So, um, so maybe as a last question, what are you curious about, and where do you think you might uh, look into next?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I really like my job. Like, and my team is we're pretty new at my company. Like, I work in the digital technologies team at this medical device company. So, we're doing a lot of really exciting work, and we have like a lot of really exciting things in the pipeline over the next few years. So, I definitely see a lot of advancement there. Part of what I'm working on is in medical augmented reality, which is a pretty new space, and it's only going to keep being a more exciting space to be in as technology advances. So I'm definitely like I'm a very ambitious person, so I'm definitely like interested in like continuing to I guess like climb the corporate ladder, so to speak. And then in terms of coaching, I'm currently in the middle of like running this group coaching program right now, and like come February I'll have it open up again, and I've been thinking a lot about scaling and what that looks because I like I said before, I really do want this to be affordable and available to as many people as possible. So yeah, so I'm really excited to be like opening that back up again and like the next version, and then you'll also start seeing me on Instagram. I think is what I'm like kind of active on there now, but I'm like I've wanted to get on Instagram for a really long time, and I just like haven't had time to really sit down and I mean, every social media platform is so different and really likes different kinds of things and content. So it's just, I need to sit down and really figure out like how does Instagram even work. But that's the next like I think exciting thing for me. It's just like scaling this weird social media presence that I've acquired.
No, but really cool, and always staying curious. That is
Yeah.
really, really important in these times where so many new things come upon us very
Yeah.
quickly. Also,
Yeah, for sure. And then, even outside of work, I mean, last February I did some solo travel in South America, which I was life changing for all of the reasons and like really amazing. And I would love to do just more traveling because that was not something I really got to do as an academic, but I have the time and the resources to do that now outside of academia. So that's on my personal to do that is not work related.
yeah. Oh, yeah. And the world, yeah, there are so many things to discover.
I know.
So that's yeah, cool. Yeah. No, thanks a lot. Maybe before wrapping up, could you condense 3 tips for our listeners that are just about to be in the phase to transition from academia, and maybe also who are curious to get more active on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Well, get on LinkedIn is always my biggest tip. Like LinkedIn is your friend. So like, get on LinkedIn, like make a profile, like follow me, connect with me. Like I want to help. I want to help, and that's my first big piece of advice. And like branching off of that, I also really recommend starting to network with people and doing informational interviews. And that's where the first step where I see PhDs struggling and say like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I'm interested in. I'm like, just go and talk to people who have careers that interest you, ask them what their day to day is like, and try to figure out like, is that something that I think I would be interested in doing? And from there, you can pick just one career path, which is what I would recommend. And then that leads to my third tip is really just pick like niche down as much as you can. Pick one career. You don't have to know what you want to do forever. Just pick the thing that seems the most interesting, figure out what you need to do to upskill, and then going back to LinkedIn, you can really just LinkedIn's great for personal branding. You can really make it very clear that you're targeting this career field. You can post content on LinkedIn, and really just reaching out to people and telling people, hey, I'm like moving into this career field. I've learned everything that I can. And that's ultimately like those steps are how you transition, like in a nutshell, which sounds simple, but it's
Yeah.
the networking and the being active on LinkedIn like really is very hard for people, which I get it, but it is ultimately the way to get a job. Like just submitting resumes to job ads, it's not like it does work in some cases, but most of the time that is not how people get jobs, unfortunately.
Mm. Yeah. We need to upskill on that, so to say.
Yeah, and that's
Mm.
why it's important to pick like one career area, because sometimes you don't need to upskill so much depending on what your prior experience is. Sometimes you need to upskill a lot. So that's also why it's really important to talk to people to figure out where are my skills lacking and how can I develop them on my own. You don't need another degree. Like don't get another degree. You can definitely like learn. You're an expert learner. That is like the last thing I will say. Like you can teach yourself anything, you can learn anything. Like that's the whole point of the PhD. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks a lot. With this inspiring last sentence, I think we are ready to close our chat. Thanks a lot for sharing your story and your tips, and also thank you, our listeners, for being here with us. And yeah, stay connected on our social media platforms. We are on all of them, and yeah, stay tuned for other exciting content coming up. Okay, bye bye.